G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day. Now today what we need to speak about is what Russian President Vladimir Putin said yesterday in his peace proposal. Now, of course, what we're going to look at today is Ukraine's 10-point peace plan, what Russia's peace proposal was, what China's was, and of course this all comes before the Swiss peace conference. Now, I've started and restarted this video like 20 times. I haven't been sleeping well at all yesterday. I took a sleeping drug, and if anyone knows temazepam, then the next day your brain is like mush. So we're going to get through it. I'm just determined, regardless, we're getting through this video. So we're going to look at all of that. We'll look at what Zelensky's response has been through this, Mikhailo Podolak's, and of course, we'll actually look at what Putin actually said as well, and we'll draw this on the map for you to get an idea. Now, Western officials and Western media, which is the same thing basically, have been saying that there's going to be some attempt to discredit the Swiss peace conference starting today in Lucerne, Switzerland. And this will come by either Russia or China. Now, we'll speak of those two countries. Firstly, Russia is the other belligerent in this conflict. They're the ones mounted the war, they had the invasion, but they will not be present at the peace conference. Although Switzerland, the Swiss officials have said that eventually Russia will need to be involved and present at a conference like this in the future, but Ukraine has said that for this one, Russia's not to be there. Now, because of this, China is now not attending. They have said that if for them to attend a conference like this, one of the requirements is that Russia would need to be present. And for the inverse of this, not only is China not attending, but China is actually going to hold their own peace conference as well. Now, China is a massively influential country around the world. Look at the population, the industrial capacity, and also ties into the West and into Russia and every corner of the globe. China is incredibly important in this, and it's not to be downplayed. So that is an important element of this too. Now, this conference sort of was hijacked by Putin with this very public offer. But we knew, Putin knew, everyone knew this was never going to get accepted. I think more the goal was to show that we're putting an offer on the table which could happen today. Now, of course, Zelensky's peace plan could happen today, but of course the other side in this conflict, regardless if it's Putin or Zelensky or Putin, that their goals are only achievable militarily because it's not mutually exclusive. I think the goal in this from Putin was potentially to sway leaders who are on the fence, maybe dangle a carrot, because, like we said, these goals that are set by either Ukraine or Russia have to be achieved militarily, because with 91 borders or occupation of areas at the moment, we know neither side is willing to move on that. So it's going to be achieved militarily. Well, any military movement through areas has huge bloodshed. And like I've said many times, and I'll continue to say, we have not seen anywhere near the worst of this war so far. We're probably not even 20% through the worst of this war, just due to, well, any movement is going to have to push through massively experienced rows of troops, defensive positions, and into then cities. Now, Ukraine, and we spoke about this yesterday, and I actually believe this is probably being underreported from people I talk to who are not public, but behind the scenes help me with things, is the energy issue, the energy crisis that Ukraine is currently having. And of course, this is going to be significantly worse as Russia keep hitting these critical infrastructure energy facilities. And as the temperature starts cooling off in the end of the year into winter, this could begin a humanitarian crisis. So there will be countries who are looking for an end to this. So let's have a look at what Putin said and what Zelensky has said and what the advisor to the head of the office of Zelensky has said as well. Now, we'll go over this. We'll go over it more in depth at the end. But basically, this is the meat of it. This was at the end of what's on the Kremlin website. So these conditions are simple. The Ukrainian troops must be completely withdrawn from Donetsk, Luhansk People's Republics, and Kherson Zap regions. Let me note, they must be withdrawn from the entire territory of these regions with their administrative borders at the time of their being part of Ukraine. Now, with any withdrawal negotiation, you're going to negotiate, then withdraw. You're not going to do then the opposite. As soon as Kyiv declares that it is ready to make the decision and begin a real withdrawal of troops from these regions, and can officially notify that it abandons its plans to join NATO, so security umbrella of NATO. Our side will follow an order to cease fire and start negotiations will be issued by us that very moment. Putin, of course, also wants all sanctions lifted against Russia. I repeat, we will do this expediently. Of course, we also guarantee unhindered and safe withdrawal of Ukrainian units and formations. So there's a fair bit in this, but let's look at it on the map to then start. So these 4 regions. How much does Russia actually occupy of these regions? So, of course, here is Ukraine in the center. The red areas been occupied since 22, and the purple now over 10 years. Now, for some of you, this may be dumb, but regardless, this is the Kherson Oblast down here, judged by this border here. As you can see, Russia occupy this part and, of course, the left bank of the Dnipro. Now, this is the Zaporizhia area here. So let's have a look right here. Of course, one thing to point out is just here on the occupied side is then the ZNPP nuclear power plant. Now, we'll talk more about that because that is in Ukraine's peace proposal 10-point peace plan, the number one thing is nuclear safety. Now, we have the Donetsk Oblast that sits here. Luhansk Oblast sits down here. And then this is really rough, I'm sorry, but this is the Kharkiv Oblast where you can see a few parts are occupied. So if this was accepted, that we presume Russia would pull out of these regions as well. But as you can see, that Russia does not completely occupy any of these 4 oblasts of which he then wants, but does occupy the majority of these. Now, overall in this, Russia is occupying, according to War Mapper, 17.57% of Ukraine. If these demands were met, it would occupy then 22%. So another 4.5% would then be taken. So this is basically what Putin is then looking for as far as ground there. But one thing I want to talk about is how people may see this and what would happen if a more reasonable offer was made, like diplomatically of how people see this. And I'm not meaning how Biden and Zelensky and, Schulz will see this, but how a lot of other nations, a hell of a lot of other nations going to this rather than those main players. How would this... So imagine if Putin came out to sort of hijack this summit and said, right, we will have peace tomorrow if then, imagine, like the border is frozen right here. And not only that, Russia will then withdraw from Luhansk. And not only that, we will hand back the nuclear power plant that sits in here to Ukrainian operators under the supervision of the IAEA, of course, the Atomic Energy Agency for Security and Measures. Imagine how that would be. Now, I think this goes into Putin knew that his proposal was never going to get accepted, but it's more so then to justify further actions. And look, we put this action out there, it wasn't accepted, therefore we moved through. But I would be interested to see what other countries thought outside of your typical ones if a proposal like that was then put forward. But as we know, Putin has said, and Russian officials say, that any proposals need to go into the realities on the ground. The reality on the ground right now is that Russia has the initiative in all front lines on which they are pushing. Now, this was, of course, quickly shot down of what Putin wanted, and there was more in it than just what we read. But Zelensky has compared this to then Hitler. These are ultimatum messages that are no different from messages of the past. He will not stop. It's the same thing Hitler used to do. This is why we should not trust these messages. Now, of course, what we hear more and more about the he will not stop is what the West and NATO countries are telling us, that if Russia is not stopped in Ukraine, then they have ultimate goals to push through Europe as well. Like I've stated a million times before, it doesn't hold up to critical thinking. It does not hold up to the pro-Russian side of, okay, we've got the massive military, but Putin has not said that we want that. No official has said that. The pro-Ukraine side says, well, with some weapons and some planes, we can stop this. Well, the amount of equipment needed to push through NATO, there's no way we could ever supply that to Ukraine. So either way, it doesn't really hold up there. Russia couldn't do it militarily. And if they could do it militarily, then Ukraine wouldn't have the manpower or the equipment to stop it, if that then makes sense. So let's look at what then Ukraine would then have in their peace plan. So This is funny. It's interesting that number 5 and 6 here are actually the territorial integrity and cessation of hostilities, where number 1 is nuclear safety. Now, that goes into what if, like I said in that other proposal, if that was put forward, we'll hand then this nuclear plant back. But number 5 and 6 for the withdrawal of Russian troops and restoration of the borders, of course, of occupied areas. Russia at the moment with the defensive lines with moving on the ground, they're not going to do that. And nor is Ukraine going to give up land as per what Putin wants that is not even occupied. And Justice and Special Tribunal, of course, those who have committed crimes being brought under the ICC. I think this has maybe gone out the window with the US saying that the ICC has no jurisdiction for then the arrest of Netanyahu from Israel. I think, well, if you're saying that they have no jurisdiction, no right to do this, you can't apply it when it suits you or when it doesn't suit you. So I think a pity that this may not ever come forward. Number 8, prevention of future aggression. Of course, that is meaning that there shouldn't be any problem for Ukraine to join something like NATO, which is, of course, Putin doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO. Now, let's have a look then at what China's peace plan is here in their 12-point peace proposal. And as you'll notice, that number 7 is nuclear power plant safety, and number 1 is respecting the sovereignty of all countries, abandoning the Cold War mentality. And we'll see here, the security of this region should not be achieved by strengthening or expanding military blocs. That's talking about NATO. The legitimate security interests and concerns of all countries must be taken seriously and addressed properly. Now, this is something we hear Russia talk about a lot, is that their security interests were never taken into account. And we hear about this well back since the end of then the Soviet Union. Cessation of hostilities and peace talks, humanitarian crises, and, of course, protections of POWs, strategic risks, facilitating grain exports, unilateral sanctions. So stopping those sanctions, that's something that Putin really wants, as well as they are having some effect, although not the effect that people were looking for. Now, let's go over more of exactly what was said and what Ukraine has said back. So Mikhail Podolyak, the advisor to the head of the Office of the President of course, Ukraine, which is President Volodymyr Zelensky, there's no new peace proposals from Russia. Entity Putin has voiced only the standard aggressors said, which has been heard many times already. Its content is quite specific, highly offensive to international law, and speaks absolutely eloquently about the incapacity of the current Russian leadership to adequately assess realities. What I will say about the adequately assessing realities is that on the front line at the moment, Russia does have the initiative by any measure. They have the manpower, they have more men, more shells, more air force, and more defensive work. So we need to take into that is a reality currently. Now, can the pendulum of war swing? Yes, it can. But today's reality is that. Point by point, the proposal, Russian forces, looks like this. Give us your territories, give up your sovereignty and your subjectivity, leave yourselves unprotected, so NATO, live together with Western countries, all sanctions in full immediately so that we can fill our militarised economy and make more investments in information provocations around the world. Of course, there's no novelty in this, real peace proposals and no desire to end the war, but there is a desire not to pay for this war and to continue it in new formats. It's a complete sham. Therefore, once again, get rid of the illusions and stop taking seriously the proposals of Russia and the that are offensive to common sense. What many people have said is if there is something assigned here where Ukraine doesn't then join NATO, many people may leave the country, and of course Ukraine's economy will struggle. If the sanctions are lifted, then Russia will be able to remilitarize and will just have another invasion again and will be in a better position for their goals set than years ago. So let's look at more of what Putin has then said. We've read this one here. Let's look at what some of the other points in this that he wants. The second demand is Ukraine's refusal to join NATO. So, number 1, the neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of Ukraine. So, no nuclear weapons, demilitarization, and denazification. We hear about this a lot. Peace agreements should include the lifting of sanctions against Russia. The Russian Federation, is ready for negotiations with all countries, including Europe, which Putin called on to improve relations. He added, we are not talking about freezing the conflict, but about its complete cessation. And regardless of how you see this, there are people around the world and people in many Western countries who just want an end to this regardless of how it looks. Number 4, Putin said the new borders of the Russian Federation, Crimea, Donbass, Zaporizhia, and Kherson should be fixed by international treaties that has become internationally recognized. So Russia would physically, on a map, have that. Putin said that Russia is making a real peace proposal, but if the West and Kyiv refuse, then responsibility for the bloodshed will be theirs. After the Putin speech, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that this proposal would be officially transmitted to other countries through ambassadors. Putin said the previous negotiations in March 22 he was ready to withdraw troops from Kherson and Zaporizhia regions in exchange for land access to Crimea through Ukrainian territory, but Ukraine, according to his version, rejected this proposal, saying Ukraine didn't then want this. So as we noted right in the very beginning, this was then proposed the day before the opening of the Peace Formula Summit in Switzerland, based on Ukraine's 10-point peace plan. The Kremlin thus wants to make sure that these statements ultimately become the main topic of the meeting and not Zelensky's peace formula. Putin's conditions, there is no condition for Zelensky's resignation from the post of President of Ukraine, which has been discussed a lot recently in connection with the Kremlin's statements about the illegitimacy of the president after Ukraine, of the president of Ukraine after May 20. Of course, that's when Zelensky's voted in term ended, but with martial law can then continue on. And this is what then Putin has said about the peace conference itself. There is an active promotion of the initiative to convene the so-called high-level international conference in Switzerland on peace in Ukraine. Moreover, they intend to hold it shortly after the G7 summit, which is what we saw in the last few days. G7 summit, of course, Ukraine was there. That's the main topic of conversation, and then straight into then the peace summit, which, of course, we know was put in there purposely so you get this support. Then to the summit, look at the new money going through. This is what we're proposing to other nations. As you know, we were naturally not invited to the meeting in Switzerland. After all, these are not negotiations, but a desire of a group of countries to keep pushing their policy and resolve issues that directly affect our interests. In this regard, I'd like to stress that it is impossible to reach a peaceful solution to the Ukraine crisis and to overall European security without Russia's participation, without an honest and responsible dialogue with us. So that's what Putin has said in the beginning of his talk. Legends, I hope this made sense. I'm mushy today. Have a great day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.